Parents planned to kick me out at 16 if I wasn't dad's bio kid. Now their precious daughter isn't either, and I'm the villain for suggesting they treat her the same. 5 years ago, when I was around 16 years old, my mom's ex-boyfriend from high school reached out to my dad to tell him about the affair that they had had for a couple of months around the time that I was conceived. For 16 years, he had never spoken about it to anybody, but all of a sudden, he had felt the urge to reach out because he believed that I could be his daughter, and it had created a lot of drama in our family. My parents have been married for a long time. They have been together since college, but their marriage has not always been a happy one. Apparently, in the initial days of their marriage, my dad was always busy with work, and my mother had gotten pregnant with me just a couple of months before their wedding, so her in-laws had talked her into quitting her job so she could stay at home and take care of me, and she was not happy with that. So earlier, there were quite a lot of personal differences, but they refused to leave each other because they claimed that they loved each other. Anyway, that's none of my business, but that was the source of a lot of tension during the initial days of their marriage, and apparently, that's why my mother had fallen weak and ended up having an affair while she was engaged. But the affair only lasted for a couple of months, and she ended it as soon as she found out that she was pregnant, or so she says. After I was born, her ex-boyfriend had obviously done the maths, and he believed that I was his daughter and wanted to get a paternity test conducted, but back then, my mother had refused and had somehow convinced him to leave her alone. Apparently, he had reached out to my mother several times over the past 16 years because he really believed that I could be his daughter, and over time, he had even built his own family. But 5 years ago, he had some serious health problems and decided that he had to get a paternity test conducted once and for all, and because he did not want to argue with my mother about it once again, he decided to reach out to my dad and tell him the truth about the affair and everything. That led to a confrontation between him and my mother, and I remember there was a lot of fighting and screaming and crying for a couple of weeks. I could understand that they were mad at each other, but what I failed to understand was why I was being threatened with being kicked out of the house and the family so they could preserve the peace of the family. A lot of times during those couple of weeks after my dad found out the truth, both my parents seemed to agree on one thing: I would be sent away to live with my grandparents or some other relative if I actually turned out to be her affair partner's biological child. The reason was pretty clear. It was because if I actually turned out to be the result of an affair, it would become very difficult for my parents to continue to stay together, which honestly seemed like more of a problem for them, and I really don't understand why they were taking it out on me. I even tried to talk to them several times about it, but they always dismissed the conversation whenever I brought it up, saying that they had thought about it already and it was what was best for everyone, even me. I couldn't understand how it was in my best interest to be sent away from my parents for something that was not even my fault, but my parents told me that they were already dealing with a lot of stuff. They did not need me to get dramatic with them to add more to it. I genuinely found it very weird, and I still can't wrap my head around the fact that they were fighting with each other, but they still knew that they were going to stay with each other after everything and make it work like a family. However, they could not extend the same courtesy to me, their daughter who they had raised since I was a baby, regardless of my paternity. I was very stressed out for those couple of weeks that they were fighting because I was uncertain about my future in the family. Anyway, after a couple of weeks of fighting, they finally agreed to get the paternity test done, and waiting for the results was really horrible for me, but thankfully, as it turns out, I actually am my father's biological child and I did not get kicked out. However, the way I was treated for those few weeks changed everything for me, especially the way that I perceived my parents. It became very obvious to me that to them, I was dispensable, and that was hurtful, but it was a much needed reality check. What made it worse was the fact that they did not even bother to apologize to me for treating me badly during those weeks and just pretended like that whole episode never happened. They apologized to each other. My mom apologized to him for having an affair, and my dad apologized to her for never giving her enough time after they got engaged, and they decided to get couples counseling, but nobody seemed to care about me. After that incident, my relationship with my parents has been very strained, and honestly, I would not have even stayed in touch with them if it was not for my college fund. Both my parents are quite rich, and I had no intention of working my way through college or taking out a student loan, which would just unnecessarily increase my difficulties, which is why I continued to stay with them even after that incident and stayed in touch with them throughout college. But I still maintained a careful distance from them and only spoke to them out of a sense of obligation and politeness, not because I had any real affection for them after that incident took place. I'm 21 now and I just graduated college, which means that I don't really need to stay in touch with my parents anymore. I had been planning on slowly phasing them out of my life, but I guess they handed me the perfect excuse to cut them out of my life forever now. That's because a couple of days ago, they called an emergency family meeting, and I had to go back home because I thought there was an actual emergency, but as it turns out, it was just more family drama. When I went back home, my parents said that they had an announcement to make and they needed both me and my sister to be there for it. My sister is 2 years younger than me and is in college right now. She and I have never been close, but it's not like we have ever been on bad terms either, so we have a pretty neutral relationship. Anyway, both of us were there for the announcement, and that's how we found out that apparently, my mother had not just had that one affair while she was engaged to my father. 2 years into their marriage, she had another affair, but that was a lot more short-lived and she had ended it within 2 weeks. One of my parents' mutual friends from college had been in town and they had reconnected over lunch, which is how my mother ended up getting together with him at the time. She felt really guilty, so she ended everything quickly, and even he was in town just for a couple of weeks, so after he left, they never spoke again. But those 2 weeks were enough to get my mom pregnant, and my sister had been a result of those 2 weeks. So while I was my dad's biological child irrespective of the affair that my mother had, and she had had a paternity test conducted after my sister was born, and unfortunately, she was not my dad's biological child. My mother had known about it all along, but he had never talked to my dad about it because she did not want to ruin her marriage. However, after 5 years of couples counseling, she had finally worked up the courage to tell him about it, and surprisingly, he had taken it well. She had told him that that was the last time that she had had an affair, and after my sister was born, she had been fully devoted to her family. My father believed that and decided to forgive her, but they still decided that they had to tell us about it because this was something that we needed to deal with as a family. Besides, by being completely honest and transparent with us, they also wanted to give my sister an opportunity to decide whether she wanted to reconnect with her biological father or not, and if she did, my mother would put her in touch with him. After that, it was up to her biological father what he wanted, but the least that she could do for my sister was this. Once this revelation had been made, everybody got quite emotional, and my sister ended up crying and saying that she wanted nothing to do with her biological father, because according to her, she had only one dad and that was our father. Everybody got very teary-eyed, and I guess I was the only one who was fuming because back when it was suspected that I might be the result of an affair, things had been very different. I was treated really badly by my parents, who constantly ignored me and treated me like the black sheep of the family for something that was not even my fault. They had actually even considered kicking me out and sending me away to live with other people to preserve the peace of the family, but now that they knew for a fact that my sister was the result of an affair, they were acting like this was all fine. I just couldn't take it, the emotional drama and stuff, and I decided to speak up because it was disgusting. After almost 5 years of keeping things to myself because I did not want to disturb the peace of the family and also because I did not want to risk my chances of receiving my college fund by instigating any fights, I decided that I had no reason to stay quiet and it was time that I spoke up for myself. So I brought up how 5 years ago, they had been considering sending me away and cutting ties with me just because there was a possibility that I might not be my dad's biological child. They had apologized to each other since they had known all along that they were going to stick by each other, but I had been dispensable. But now that it had been proven for a fact that it was my sister who was not my dad's biological child, it was very funny how differently she was being treated. At this point, the only thing that would be fair was for them to give her the same treatment that they had been planning for me, to cut her off, to have her live with other people so they could preserve the peace of the family. There was an immediate outburst from my parents, who started labeling me as selfish and mean, and told me that things were very different now from what they had been 5 years back. But I didn't care about any of that. I stuck to my point, and I told them that the only thing that would be fair was what I had suggested and started rambling about how I was being cruel and cold-hearted, and it was not how family behaves. If I'm being honest, I couldn't care less about how a family behaves because I knew for a fact that they hadn't had such strong principles about family values and morals when I was under the radar of being an affair child 5 years ago. Back then, I had been a minor at just 16 years of age. At least my sister is 19, an adult, and she will be able to handle living by herself as long as my parents continue to send her money and stuff. All that I was asking for them to do was cut her off, just like they had been planning to cut me off, and even the thought of that made them so mad and earned me a bunch of labels for even suggesting something like that. I had a huge fight after that with them, and I basically laid it all out, because I was sick of pretending that everything was fine. I told them that I had never really forgiven them, and they did not deserve it either because they had never asked for my forgiveness. Their priorities were very clear, and even though before all of this had happened, I had always known that they had a bit of a soft spot for my sister, but I had never considered that it would go to such extremes. They were just not ready to let go of the darling daughter, but it had been very easy for them to consider letting me go, and that told me everything that I needed to know about them as parents. Instead of accepting the mistake and apologizing for it, they continued to defend their behavior and told me that things have changed now and they are not the same people that they used to be 5 years back, which is why they are dealing with the situation better than they had back then, and I needed to understand that. But I was not in a mood to be understanding about anything, so I ended up lashing out at them, and I told them that I never wanted to speak again. I told them that they did not need to cut anybody off because I was cutting them off and I had had enough of them for a lifetime. Now that I had graduated, I did not want them in my life anymore, and after saying that, I left. I felt pretty content after venting my feelings, and I don't feel particularly sorry about everything that I had said, but my sister reached out to me recently, after the incident, and she told me that she could understand that I was mad at our parents, but things really had changed from what they used to be 5 years back, and she believed that I needed to be a little more mature about things like this because it's all really sensitive and all that jazz. I don't really think that she's right in this case, but even then, I have been having some second thoughts. Am I the a-hole for demanding that my parents treat my sister the same way that they treated me? Update 1. So it's been 5 days since I had that fight with my parents and I told them that I never wanted to speak to them again, and 3 days since my sister reached out to me to tell me that I need to be more understanding of my parents' situation. And I have decided that I really don't need to pay attention to what my sister said because she doesn't know anything about my situation. It's very easy for her to sympathize with our parents because she has never been at the receiving end of their behavior like I had been 5 years back. I'm not saying that they had always been terrible with me and that I have never had any good times with them, but my sister has no idea what it feels like to be treated the way I had been. And so, she has no right telling me what I should do and what I shouldn't. I hadn't responded to her message and I don't think that I'm going to because I really don't need to dignify that with a response. My parents have not even bothered to reach out to me to apologize in the past 5 days, so I'm pretty sure that even if I do cut them out of my life, it's not really going to affect them. As a matter of fact, I really don't even think that it should because for the past 5 years, my behavior with them has been really cold and distant, and they have hardly ever taken note of it. I'm sure if they had actually cared about me, they would have noticed that I have not been myself with them ever since that incident took place, and they would have tried to make it right with me, but they did not care enough to do that. So I don't understand why it's such a big deal for me to say that I'm cutting them out of my life. Anyway, I have made up my mind and I'm really thankful to all the people who commented on my post earlier. That really helped me get some clarity on the situation as well. I have been having some second thoughts because my sister usually doesn't offer me advice or anything, and we have a very civil relationship. So I had actually been considering whatever she had said, but now, I don't think that I need to do that. Since 5 days have already passed since the fight, I really don't think that my parents will try and get back in touch with me, and I really am hoping that they don't because I don't want to drag this fight out and create a whole thing out of it. So I hope that they let this go, gracefully and with dignity. And if they don't, I'll definitely still try to do that so at least I can move on. Update 2. Hey, so it's been 2 weeks since I had that fight with my parents, and a couple of days ago, they showed up at my apartment with a bunch of papers. They looked like they meant business, and my roommates ended up leaving almost immediately because I guess they could tell that some stuff was about to happen and they wanted to give me my space. I moved into this apartment with a couple of my friends in our 3rd semester and we have been living here since then. My parents had helped me pay rent for it initially while I was still in college, so they knew where it was located. I started covering the rent by myself only a couple of months ago, a few months before I graduated and started my first job. This is all relevant because my parents had apparently come by to settle scores by bringing up how much money they had spent on me over the years. That's what all the paperwork was about. They had had their accountants do the math and they had brought the papers along to show me exactly how much I owed them because they believed that I had used them to pay for my college tuition and other expenses, even though I had no intention of keeping in touch with them after I graduated. They even told me that they had noticed that after the incident, I had distanced myself, but I still stayed in touch, and they had figured that it was because I was upset with them, and rightfully so. But they had always believed that I would come around eventually and would understand their situation as well, and then I would forgive them. However, after the last fight, they realized that I really did not have any intention of forgiving them and making peace with them at any point. I just wanted them to pay for me to go to college, and then, I had probably been planning on cutting them out of my life altogether. And to be honest, they were not all that wrong. That had been exactly what I had been planning to do, and they had hit the nail on the head for the first time. To be honest, partial credit for that would go to me because during my last fight with them, I had pretty much laid out all my cards on the table and they knew exactly what I had been thinking. But the only thing that they were kind of wrong about was the fact that I had used them for my tuition and expenses in college. I wouldn't agree with that because they had willingly covered all of that for me and I had not forced them to do any of that. Neither had I ever made any promises to them in exchange for that, like I would forgive them or keep in touch with them. So I really didn't understand what they were so mad about. And I told them that I had not used them, I had just done what was convenient for me, and I was not going to feel sorry about it. I had just behaved exactly the way they had been behaving with me. They had rejected and accepted me on the basis of their convenience, so I was doing the same thing. Granted, they had never kicked me out, but that was only because I had gotten lucky and turned out to be my dad's biological daughter. However, if I had turned out to be the result of the affair, I would have been punished for it, even if it was not my fault. The fact that they had even been considering punishing me for it made me realize that they were selfish people, and if I'm gonna have to deal with selfish people, I'm gonna have to stoop down to their level and look out for myself because clearly, they were not gonna do that for me. So I told them that I did whatever I had to because getting them to pay for my college tuition and expenses was going to be easy because they were planning on doing that anyway, and I did whatever it took to make sure that they paid for everything. And yes, now that I did not need them anymore, I did plan on cutting them off, and they had just made it easier for me by treating my sister so differently when they found out that she was actually the result of an affair. So now, if they actually expected me to pay back the amount that I owed them, they were really just either delusional or plain stupid because there was no way that I was going to do that. At that point, my parents started cursing at me and told me that they were going to make sure that they dragged me to court, but I just laughed in their faces and told them that I would only wish them luck because it wasn't like they had a legal leg to stand on. That seemed to make them even more angry, and they started accusing me of being a gold digger, saying that I have no morals or values, that they were really unlucky that I was their biological daughter, and that they would have been happier if I had actually been an affair kid. I just kept smiling throughout it all because it really made no difference to me, and after a while, they got tired of yelling at me and not getting a reaction out of me, so they just left and told me that I had to watch out now because they were going to make sure that I paid for how I had been behaving so far. I say bring it on, I don't really care about them. Update 3. Hey, so I guess my parents realized that they could not drag me to court like they had claimed they were going to do it because, well, on what basis would they even do that? And when they realized that they couldn't take me to court, they decided that they would use the other best option, social media court. It's been 3 days since they visited me, and a couple of hours ago, my phone started blowing up with notifications from friends and family, and a bunch of other people because apparently, my parents had made a post to expose me and call me out for using them. They have created an Instagram account with a username that says exposing my name, real classy and original of them. On that account, they have made several posts, mainly of their transactions and conversations with me, and they're basically painting me in a light that shows me to be the villain because they have only talked about how I cut them off after one fight recently, after years and years of taking money from them for every little expense that I had, and now that I'm earning on my own, I don't seem to need them anymore. Of course, by the way, that they had put it, anybody in their right mind would believe that they were the victims in the situation and I was the bad guy. They hadn't put out all the information because if they had, people would have been able to come to a fair conclusion. And that's what I really have a problem with, because if they are going to go public with this, I would prefer for them to be at least honest and put out all the facts. They had even gone out of their way to tag my friends, our family members, and a couple of other acquaintances that I'm not even close to anymore, who are just getting dragged into this drama unnecessarily. I don't know what they hoped they were going to achieve by doing this, but so far, relatives and acquaintances have contacted me only to tell me that they don't know what's going on with us, but they just don't want to get involved here. I respect that, they don't know both sides yet, so they don't have to be with me on this. Anyway, it's really embarrassing for me because they are making a spectacle out of this and I don't like it. I'm not one to wash dirty linen in public, and so, I've been trying to contact my parents and get them to take those posts down, not because I'm afraid but because I don't want other people getting dragged into this. They haven't responded so far, but I'm gonna keep trying. And if they don't take it down, I'll be left with the other option to respond so that people at least know the truth about everything. Update 4. Hey, so it has been a couple of days since my parents made that account on social media and started trying to get people to be on their sides. I kept trying to contact them and get them to take that down, but after 24 hours of trying, when I realized that it was pointless because they were just not going to respond to me, I decided to put out the whole truth on every platform so that people would at least know that I'm not the bad guy here. And then, I decided to tell my parents that if they did not take that account and that post down, I was going to take legal action against them because they had no right to defame me like this. Even then, they did not respond for a couple of hours, but when I told them that I was serious and that I was already talking to a lawyer, even though that was a bluff, I guess they realized that they could get into trouble for this, and they finally deleted everything. So at least that was one problem solved. After I had put out my side of the story on all platforms, a lot of my relatives reached out to me and told me that whatever had happened to me and how I had been treated by my parents was horrible, and most people just seemed to be very sympathetic towards me. From what I have heard from my cousin, my relatives are really upset about whatever they have found out about my parents from my post, and they don't want to keep in touch with them anymore, so my parents are getting ostracized, and I guess I'm not the only one cutting them off anymore. My friends had obviously been on my side throughout all of this, so it really didn't make a difference whether they had been tagged in the post or not. I guess their plan had been to make me look like the bad guy and have me alienated from everyone, but I think that backfired pretty badly because that's exactly what's happening to them right now, and it's just karma. The last message that my parents sent me was one saying that they were glad that I had chosen to cut them off because they are better off without me in their lives, and I bet they are. I truly hope that they get better because there's clearly something wrong with them. And even if they continue to stay this way, I just hope that they just stay away from me. I have a nice job, good friends, and roommates, and at least my extended family still loves me. I don't think I'm gonna have any reason to miss my parents anytime soon, lol. I'm happy with my life right now and I don't want anything to do with them anymore.